Imagine for a second how you talk to a toddler.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know, you probably change the pitch of your voice, you use different vocabulary, your posture softens.
Right, right.
Maybe you even sit on the floor. Now, imagine taking that exact same voice, that vocabulary, and that physical posture into a high-stakes performance review with your boss.
That would be a disaster.
It'd be totally absurd, right?
Yeah.
We intuitively know that we need to adapt to different environments. But, for some reason, the fact that we wear these different masks, it often leaves us with this, I don't know, this slight nagging guilt.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we feel like we are being inconsistent or maybe even a little bit fake because we aren't being our true authentic self in every single room.
Yeah, that anxiety is practically a modern epidemic at this point.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have been culturally conditioned to believe that the ultimate psychological ideal is possessing one solid, unchanging inner self. The prevailing wisdom is that you should find out who you really are and then project that identical persona, whether you are at a backyard barbecue, a corporate boardroom, or a family dinner.
And if you don't do that, you're failing somehow.
Exactly. When we inevitably deviate from that, because we all do, we assume we are experiencing some kind of moral failure.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because this deep dive is going to completely dismantle that guilt.
Hopefully, yeah.
We're going to explore why behaving differently in different settings is not a modern psychological disorder or lack of character, but it's actually the default state of human psychology.
Right.
And we're going to see how it's actually the default state of biology, too. We're pulling all of this from a really deeply challenging book titled After Narrative, and it's by the philosopher Boris Kriger.
Yeah, and Boris Kriger essentially takes a sledgehammer to our conventional, comforting models of human identity in this book.
He really does.
But, to understand his argument, we have to start exactly where he starts, which is by examining the work of another famous philosopher, Alasdair MacIntyre.
Okay.
Boris Kriger uses MacIntyre to diagnose the specific cultural disease we are suffering from today, before he attempts to cure it.
Right, and MacIntyre diagnoses this disease using a really vivid thought experiment. It's the fable of the burning laboratories.
Yes. It is a really striking piece of philosophical rhetoric.
It really is.
MacIntyre asks us to imagine a world where a massive public backlash against science leads to a mob essentially destroying all the laboratories.
Like a huge anti-science revolution.
Exactly. Physicists are chased away, textbooks are burned, measuring instruments are just smashed to pieces.
Wow, okay.
And then generations later, a new society tries to rebuild science. But all they have are these charred fragments.
Right.
They might find a piece of the periodic table or a mathematical theorem that has survived but without its accompanying proof.
So they end up chanting words like relativity or gravity, almost like magic spells.
Yes.
But without actually possessing the underlying mathematical framework that made those concepts functional in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. They possess the vocabulary, but the mechanism to test whether a scientific claim is actually true, that's been completely lost.
Which is terrifying.
It is, and Boris Kriger highlights that MacIntyre argued this is exactly what has happened to our moral language in the modern world.
Oh, I see.
We argue endlessly about concepts like rights, utility, and justice, but the historical and philosophical systems that originally backed those concepts up, they have been entirely shattered.
Which perfectly explains why modern debates feel so exhausting, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have people reasoning from totally incompatible premises on social media or in politics, and there's just no shared standard to weigh those premises against each other.
Right.
It's just an interminable shouting match using the surviving fragments of a destroyed framework.
That's spot on. The overarching moral architecture is just gone. And Boris Kriger points out something really terrifying about how this structural collapse manifests in our day-to-day lives, particularly in our institutions.
Okay, how so?
Well, he looks at MacIntyre's insight into compartmentalization. We tend to think that modern evil or systemic harm is driven by individuals with a dark, malicious character, right?
Yeah, like bad people doing bad things.
Right. But MacIntyre argued it is far more often driven by strict, unyielding compartments.
Let's ground that a bit. How does that actually look in practice?
Okay, so consider the example of a railway functionary in a totalitarian regime.
All right.
His specific job is to schedule train cars with maximum efficiency to avoid bottlenecks on the tracks.
Right.
In his private life, he might be a loving father, a kind neighbor, someone who considers himself deeply moral. But at work, he never asks what the train cars contain or where the human beings inside them are going.
Because that's not his department?
Exactly. He doesn't ask because within the specific structural design of the professional role, there is literally no channel to ask that question. The vocabulary of human rights does not exist on a railway timetable.
Man, it's like having different apps open on your smartphone that are strictly firewalled.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, the professional app is running flawlessly, optimizing the schedule and preventing train collisions, but it is structurally barred from reading the moral data of the family app.
Yes.
The family app would be horrified by the cargo, but the data just cannot cross that digital border.
That firewall analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. The capacity for empathy or moral judgment hasn't been surgically removed from this railway functionary's brain.
Right, he still has it.
Exactly. What has been removed is the route. The societal arrangement has been deliberately designed so that the moral load of his actions never actually arrives at his conscience. His worlds are kept entirely separate.
So compartmentalization is the disease here. The apps are firewalled, our lives are fractured, and we lack a shared moral language.
That's the diagnosis, yes.
So MacIntyre diagnosed all of this, and he proposed a cure, right? He argued that to fix this fragmentation, we need to view our lives as a unified narrative. Like, we need to see ourselves as the protagonist of a single lifelong quest, integrating all these fractured parts of our lives into one cohesive story.
It is an incredibly seductive idea, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it feels intuitive.
It forms the backbone of almost every modern self-help philosophy, this idea that you must find your story or author your own journey.
Right.
The assumption is that if you can string all your life events into a meaningful narrative, well, then you overcome the fragmentation.
It sounds beautiful on paper. But Boris Kriger argues this narrative cure is a complete failure.
It's a total failure, yeah.
And he actually turns MacIntyre's own analytical tools against him to prove it, which I thought was fascinating.
It's a brilliant move. Boris Kriger contends that human life is absolutely not a story, and forcing it into a narrative structure is nothing more than an exercise in hindsight bias.
Hindsight bias.
Right. We look backward from our current position and impose a logical sequence onto events that were entirely disconnected when they actually happened.
I was reading this section where Boris Kriger talks about a 68-year-old hospice volunteer writing her memoir.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, she connects the dots of her life so effortlessly. She writes that her difficult childhood prepared her for a difficult marriage, and then leaving that marriage gave her the independence to build a career, which ultimately led her to volunteering at the hospice.
Right.
It reads like a perfect logical progression.
And every single sentence she wrote might be factually true. But Boris Kriger points out the subtle deception in this process. She is not discovering those connections. She is constructing them in retrospect.
Yeah.
When she was 23 years old, she did not consciously choose a difficult marriage as a preparatory training exercise for a future career in hospice care.
Of course not.
She chose it for reasons that made sense to a 23-year-old at that specific moment in time.
Wait, let me challenge that a bit, though.
Sure.
Even if she didn't know it at 23, she did genuinely learn empathy from that difficult marriage, and she uses that empathy now.
Mm.
So isn't personal growth real?
Right.
Like, are we saying all self-reflection is just fake?
No. Personal growth is entirely real.
Okay.
The skills and emotional capacities she developed are real. What Boris Kriger is criticizing is the claim that these events form a unified quest or an inevitable storyline.
Oh, I see.
Learning a lesson from a random, painful event is growth. Claiming that the painful event was a necessary, logical preamble to your current identity is hindsight bias.
Right.
From the finish line, every random turn in the maze looks like the only path you could have possibly taken.
Okay, I see the distinction now. We are forcing the raw data of our lives to fit the structure of a novel.
Exactly.
But why is that actually dangerous? I mean, if telling ourselves a story helps us sleep at night, what's the harm?
Well, the danger lies in using narrative as a test for morality, which is what MacIntyre proposed. Boris Kriger asks a pretty devastating question here. He asks, what is the actual test for a unified, coherent life narrative? And the answer is that it is an unfalsifiable test.
And a test that nothing can possibly fail is not a test at all.
Precisely. Because anyone can write a coherent story if they try hard enough. You can write a beautifully unified narrative for a saint who dedicated her life to the poor.
Right.
But you can also write a perfectly coherent, internally logical life story for a lifelong embezzler.
Or a ruthless dictator, honestly.
Exactly. In fact, the embezzler's internal narrative might be even more cohesive than the saint's because the embezzler has spent decades actively justifying his actions to himself.
Wow, yeah.
If the only criteria for a good integrated life is whether you can narrate it cohesively, well then our railway functionary passes with flying colors.
He does, because he has a highly integrated story about duty, punctuality, and serving the state.
Exactly. The narrative cure provides zero mechanism for filtering out horrific behavior.
So if the story of my life is just a trick of the mind, and the idea of a single authentic self is an illusion, who is actually driving the car?
It's a scary question.
It feels incredibly disorienting to strip away the idea of a core personality.
It does. It requires a fundamental paradigm shift in how we view human identity. And this is where Boris Kriger introduces a concept, drawing heavily on sociologists like Georg Simmel, called projective communitarianism.
Okay.
He argues that there is no one true self locked inside you like a pilot in a cockpit.
Okay, you are going to have to translate projective communitarianism into English for me, because that sounds like a term engineered to make my eyes glaze over.
I know, it's very academic. Let's think of your identity not as a solid object in a container, but as a Venn diagram.
Okay, I can picture that.
A person is the physical intersection of several overlapping communities, or what Boris Kriger calls modules. You exist precisely where these worlds overlap.
So I have a family module, a professional module, a module for my oldest friends.
Yes. And your individuality is not a secret soul hidden underneath these roles. Your individuality is the highly specific, unique combination of the circles you stand in. Nobody else on Earth occupies the exact same intersection of modules that you do.
Okay, to bring this down to earth, there's this part in Boris Kriger's book that I found fascinating but kind of puzzling initially.
Oh, which part?
He describes a 4-year-old girl sitting on the floor arguing with a stuffed bear about eating its porridge.
Oh, I love this example.
Yeah, and most of us would look at that and just think, oh, she's rehearsing for when she's a mom, cute kid stuff. But Boris Kriger sees something much deeper happening structurally, doesn't he?
He does. He sees the fundamental mechanics of human identity being built right there.
Oh.
The child isn't just reciting lines from memory. She is actively instituting a community with rules. The crucial detail is that she creates a scenario where the stuffed bear can refuse to eat.
Which means she can actually lose the argument.
Yes, exactly.
Which is really counterintuitive, because if she just wanted a power trip, she would just declare that the bear ate the porridge and move on. Right. Why does she need the bear to push back?
Because without resistance, there is no self.
Oh.
She is practicing the erection and dismantling of modules. By submitting to an external rule where an imagined other party can refuse her, she creates a boundary.
Okay.
We require an external force to push against in order to define where the world ends and where we begin in any given context.
We need resistance to exist. That is profound. I mean, we usually think of resistance, like social rules or difficult people, as something that suppresses our true personality.
Right, right.
But Boris Kriger is saying that resistance is the very thing that generates our personality in that moment.
Yes, he is.
And he highlights a really extreme natural experiment to prove this, comparing the psychological effects of solitary confinement with the life of a monastic anchorite.
Yeah, the clinical literature on solitary confinement is universally grim. When a human being is locked in total isolation, the mind breaks down rapidly.
It does.
It produces severe anxiety, hallucinations, and eventually a complete dissolution of the self. This happens because there is no external rule or community to push back.
There's no resistance.
Right. The prisoner is alone, and any imagined interlocutor can simply be edited or overwritten by the prisoner's own mind. The environment becomes a mirror, offering zero resistance.
But then you look at an anchorite, like a monk who chooses to live in total physical seclusion, sometimes for decades in a small stone room.
Yes.
They face the exact same physical isolation, but their minds do not disintegrate. In fact, they often thrive and produce incredible philosophical writings. So how do they survive the mirror?
Because the anchorite is not actually without company. The monk lives under a fiercely strict daily rule. They have fixed hours of waking, specific texts they are obligated to recite whether they feel emotionally moved to or not, and they engage with an imagined interlocutor, God, who cannot be easily edited, manipulated, or forced to agree with them.
Wow. So the monastic rule provides the resistance.
Exactly. The monk maintains a module. It perfectly illustrates that the self is constituted by its relation to something outside that has the power to say no.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. It is so tempting to look at all of this and assume it's just a symptom of modern urban alienation.
Yeah, that's the default assumption.
We assume that before smartphones, corporate jobs, and massive cities, humans used to have a single unified self. But Boris Kriger proves that this modular structure goes all the way down the evolutionary tree.
It does.
It's not a modern disease, it's ancient biology.
It predates humanity by millions of years. Boris Kriger brings in biological evidence that fundamentally changes the scope of this conversation. He points to the northern caper wasp.
Okay.
These insects have variable facial markings on their exoskeletons, and researchers have discovered that these wasps can visually process and recognize the individual faces of other wasps in their colony.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is.
We're talking about an insect with a brain the size of a grain of sand, recognizing Dave the Wasp versus Steve the Wasp.
Yeah, basically.
But how does this connect to our modular identity?
Because the wasps alter their behavior based on exactly who they're looking at.
Oh, I see.
It allows them to maintain a complex hierarchy without constantly engaging in fatal fights. A wasp will submit to a known superior, but fight an unknown interloper.
Right.
This phenomenon is known in biology as social niche specialization. Meerkats do it, field crickets do it. A cricket will sing an aggressive song to a rival, but immediately switch to a submissive acoustic profile if it recognizes a cricket that has beaten it previously.
So they are physically altering their behavioral profile based on the specific partner they are interacting with.
Exactly.
It's an evolutionary adaptation to conserve metabolic energy and avoid unnecessary injury.
It is deeply efficient to know exactly who you are dealing with and to modulate your behavior accordingly. And Boris Kriger connects this ancient biological hardware directly to human psychology, referencing a highly controversial finding from 1968.
Okay, what happened in 1968?
Psychologists were attempting to measure personality traits across different situations. They wanted to see if a person who tested as aggressive at home was equally aggressive at school or at work.
Okay, and what did the data show?
They found a correlation of only about 0.3.
Wait, 0.3 is incredibly low.
Very low.
That essentially means my behavior in the office has almost zero predictive power for how I will behave at the dinner table.
That was the crisis. For decades, the psychological community viewed this 0.3 personality coefficient as a massive failure of their own measurement tools.
Because they couldn't believe it.
Right. They assumed that a true, stable, cross-situational inner self absolutely must exist, and therefore their tests were just broken.
Right.
But Boris Kriger argues the test wasn't broken at all. The 0.3 coefficient is a perfectly accurate estimate of human nature.
The test was working. The underlying assumption was wrong.
Exactly. Most of your behavior does not belong to a static inner trait nestled inside your brain. It belongs to the relationship you are currently participating in. The self resides in the interaction.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But, it immediately brings up a huge moral dilemma.
Sure.
If I am naturally a collection of different people, depending on the room I'm in, if I am one thing with my boss, another with my spouse, and another with my friends, what happens to the concept of integrity? Like, if I'm just a social chameleon, are we all just frauds?
Well, Boris Kriger asserts that integrity absolutely exists, but our culture has been defining it incorrectly. Our folk definition of integrity relies on sameness.
Sameness, right?
We admire the person who claims to be the exact same person everywhere they go.
Right. We all know the guy who proudly announces, well, I just tell it like it is. I don't sugarcoat anything.
Yeah, that guy.
Whether he is at a loud backyard barbecue or a somber funeral, we tend to view that guy as having strong character.
And Boris Kriger uses that exact archetype, which he calls the rigid man. This man refuses to modulate his behavior for his audience or the environment. But Boris Kriger argues this behavior is not integrity, it is rigidity.
Rigidity.
It is a fundamental failure to receive and process information from his environment. It is a dead psychological circuit.
Wow.
A person who cannot be reached by the solemnity of a funeral, who cannot adjust his register to meet the emotional needs of a grieving family, is not showing moral strength. He has a broken channel.
So if simply acting the exact same way in every room is a sign of a broken channel, what is the actual test for integrity?
Boris Kriger proposes a brilliant structural test, which he defines as closure at genuine resolution.
Closure at genuine resolution. Let's unpack those terms, because resolution in this context means having distinct modes.
Yes.
Yeah.
High resolution means you actually are a different person with your toddler than you are with your boss. You possess the emotional range and situational awareness to inhabit different modules appropriately.
Okay, got it.
Closure, on the other hand, means that those different registers could survive being placed in the exact same room.
So the arrangement doesn't depend on keeping a secret.
Exactly. To clarify the mechanics of this, Boris Kriger contrasts two highly modular individuals, the diplomat and the confidence man, or the fraud.
Okay.
Both of them constantly shift their behavior based on their audience.
But they operate completely differently under the surface.
Very differently. The diplomat is highly formal, polite, and cautious when speaking to a foreign minister. An hour later, behind closed doors with his own staff, he is blunt, practical, and casual.
Right, he adapts.
He has high resolution. But, crucially, if you were to put the foreign minister and the staff in the same room, neither would feel betrayed by the diplomat's shifting behavior.
Oh, okay.
The minister understands that a diplomat speaks differently to his own team. The arrangement does not rely on secrecy. The circuit closes successfully.
But the confidence man.
Right. The fraud relies entirely on the structural separation of his modules. The illusion he projects to his victims depends completely on them never hearing the contempt he expresses to his criminal partners behind closed doors.
Yes. His worlds cannot be allowed to touch.
Exactly. If you put his victims and his partners in the same room, the entire psychological and structural arrangement collapses instantly. The fraud requires a closed, firewalled channel to survive. The diplomat does not.
This completely removes that initial guilt we talked about. If you speak differently to your child, your manager, and your best friend, you aren't being fake. You are actually engaged in an incredibly difficult, high-level psychological balancing act.
You really are.
You are maintaining high resolution, adapting to complex, varying environments, while ensuring that none of those worlds would catastrophically collapse if they suddenly collided.
It demands far more cognitive and moral energy to maintain closure at genuine resolution than it does to simply be the rigid man, bluntly acting the same everywhere.
Yeah.
It requires maintaining multiple complex realities that remain mutually compatible.
This shifts our whole perspective. We stop trying to judge the purity of someone's invisible internal soul, and instead we look at the structural arrangement of their life.
Exactly.
Which leads to a final, really provocative thought about what society has actually lost in the modern era. Not a psychological loss, but a structural one.
Yes. Boris Kriger leaves us with an unmentioned but profound insight to ponder regarding societal architecture.
Okay.
It is very common today to feel a deep, romantic nostalgia for the tight-knit, traditional village. We look back and think, well, people had better moral constraints back then because everyone knew everyone else.
Right, we imagined the baker knew the priest, who knew your wife, who knew your employer, a total web of accountability.
But Boris Kriger's framework suggests the village did not inherently produce people with superior moral character. What the village produced was a dense, inescapable loop of gossip.
Gossip, right.
In a traditional village, your modules were constantly touching. Your different registers were continually being audited by the community. If you were acting like a confidence man, it would be discovered by Tuesday afternoon because the circuits were impossible to keep closed. The environment forced closure.
Because everyone talked. You couldn't keep your worlds firewalled if you tried.
Now compare that to our modern reality. We have successfully separated our worlds to an unprecedented degree.
We really have.
Your colleagues likely do not know your extended family. Your family certainly does not know your online gaming friends or your Twitter followers. The modern division of labor and urban geography provide us with the ultimate compartmentalization for free.
Yeah.
You rarely have to expend energy to hide your different modules from one another. The architecture of modern life does it for you.
The firewalls are built into the literal hardware of society.
Precisely. Boris Kriger suggests that we haven't necessarily lost our virtue or our character as a society. We have simply lost the geographic and social intersections that used to constantly audit and test that virtue.
Man, that is something that is going to linger with me. It begs a deeply uncomfortable question. Are you actually a person of high integrity? Or are you simply benefiting from a modern life that is structurally built to ensure your different worlds will never accidentally meet and audit each other?
It reframes our entire understanding of morality from a question of inner purity to a question of structural design.
So the next time you feel that flash of guilt, that feeling that you're a completely different person when you walk into the office compared to when you were sitting on the living room floor with your kids, remember, you are not broken.
Got it all.
You don't need to force the chaotic reality of your life into a single fictional storyline just to feel authentic. You are just navigating the intersections. Keep the resolution high and make sure the circuits can close.